Come join Melissa and her guests on the Chats from the Blog Cabin podcast. From North Carolina, this podcast will have you feeling like you've known these folks for years. Listen in as they chat about life, culture, current events, and more, all with a special Southern flair. Curl up with your favorite beverage and get ready to be entertained. Tune in now for a unique experience that's fun and insightful.
Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Chats from the Blog Cabin. You know, the show where I virtually invite people into the blog cabin to chat about life. And this is one of the very few new episodes that I have actually recorded in the new studio. If they don't know, follow me on Instagram, Frugal Mom. I added on to the blog cabin. So now the blog cabin is like almost a tiny home, literally. So Antonio, welcome back to the show. And what we're talking about today, I love what we're talking about ADHD, because my middle daughter actually suffers from ADHD. So I think that's very important that we learn tools of how to cope with it and everything else. And especially around this time of year too, because I think everybody has a little bit of ADHD this time of year as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. Yeah. Or not even this time of year, in life in 2024, we all have a little of it at least. Yeah.
Yeah. So before we get into talking about ADHD and what brought you here, tell us about yourself.
Yeah. So I am Canadian and I have two almost grown sons. I'm married. I live in New York City, and I've been an executive coach for over 10 years. And before that, had some C-suite positions, was a management consultant, but literally I love being an executive coach and wake up every morning feeling really blessed to do this work. I work with fascinating, incredible people, and I am I have an adult diagnosis. I am not an adult diagnosis. I have an adult diagnosis of ADHD. And while it isn't like the total focus of my executive coaching work, it is something I am so passionate about. And that has opened up a lot of doors and opportunities and experiences that I'm happy to talk further about.
That's awesome. One of the things that you just said, that you're an adult diagnosed with ADHD. How did that diagnosis come about?
Yeah. So very typically, my oldest son got diagnosed between middle school and high school. It took me a year or two after that to get my own, but I remember thinking, oh, that sounds like me. Oh, doesn't stay focused. Emotional regulation isn't always great. Gets distracted. And it literally just sounded like me. And we know that it's very hereditary. I'm forgetting, it's at least if one parent has it, you have I think it's 50% chance. If both parents have it, it's over 80. So it's a very strong hereditary link to it. I know my mother, who's 86, you could never find the tape, the Scotch tape, or the scissors, or her car keys ever. They were never put in the same place. Yeah, so that's how I went down the path of getting my own diagnosis as an adult.
So how did you handle that diagnosis as an adult? Because I know kids are a little bit more resilient once they get the diagnosis. There's things that you can do, but when you're an adult, you're kind of set in your ways,
Yeah, that's an important point. And I do want to make the point also that more boys are diagnosed when they're children than girls, because there are two or really three kinds of large variations. One is the hyperactive, one is the inattentive, and then the third is the combination. And girls don't always show up as hyperactive. And so those are very easy symptoms or traits to see. But the inattentive can just be, who hasn't heard Mary's just dreamy, Mary's looking out the window, or you send Mary to the store and, Mary just starts dreaming along the way. Well, actually, that's inattentive. Might be. You'd need to look further, but those traits are sometimes overlooked. So while rates of adult diagnoses are similar, in children, it's boys get diagnosed earlier than women often. And so the main thing in response to your question is as an adult, we've already developed lots of coping mechanisms and skills and scaffolding. And some of us, not everyone, some people have lost many jobs and could never kind of figure out like why they just kind of couldn't get it together. And my heart like super goes out to those folks, because if they had probably been tested earlier in life, they would have at least known what they were dealing with. Knowing what the issue is often an important step in figuring out solutions. So we've developed all these coping mechanisms, but what you don't lose is this sense of what's wrong with me, right? Like, well, why do I blurt things out? And you see it as deficiencies, and that really erodes your self-confidence, right? It's the analogy I give is, little tiny knife cuts, right? You get a couple, or paper cuts. That's actually a more pleasant of, one little paper cut kind of hurts, but you forget it and you move on real quick. But if you got like a few dozen paper cuts every day and you kept getting them every day, you'd actually have a very sore arm, right? And it's a little bit like that. Like, every time I was going to do the laundry, but I got distracted by, dealing with the dog. Or one morning last week, I went to fill my son's water bottle 5 times. And every time I moved to the fridge, I got distracted. I was like, Antonia, like, get a grip. And those are, silly, insignificant. But when you're maybe at work or always late to pick up your kid from school, or at work you're always late getting your reports in or late to meetings, it creates perceptions of you. And it can be, the word that comes to mind and is that, you feel shame, and that's very toxic.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, because if you feel shame, then you don't want to even put yourself out there, because
Right.
you're so afraid of being judged and being shamed for what is natural to you, but you just can't convey to other people what's going on in your brain at the time.
Exactly. But I have to say, and I've had other adults say this, that for me personally, and I will say I can generalize somewhat from other conversations, but I don't want to speak for everyone. Getting a diagnosis as an adult was incredibly positive for me. Incredibly positive, because it was literally like that sort of washes off. Like, it's not that I'm a loser. It's not that I'm like deficient and can't change because I'm not trying hard enough. My brain is wired differently. Okay, that doesn't mean I just give up and say, well, my brain is wired differently. Too bad.
Yeah.
But it gives me knowledge. It gives me information that I can then do something with. And for me, that was so empowering. I mean, I came on your show last time after I'd written a book. I don't know if I would have written that book without having found ways to really focus my attention. Yes, very good. Thank you. Very good, Melissa. Thank you for that. And then actually, from writing that book, there were a couple of things when I did the kind of podcast circuit and the interview circuit that really, what everybody wanted to talk about was a communication framework in my book that I use with a lot of clients. They wanted to talk about the values exercise, and they wanted to talk about my ADHD journey. And that led to a conversation about scaffolding, right? Which led to, well, I learned how to prioritize and plan using this system that I use with a lot of my executive coaching clients ADHD or not. And then that led me to, well, I'm going to put that in a book. So that became the genesis of the ebook I wrote called the ADHD Success Planner, your simple guide to boost productivity with less stress.
Yep.
Yeah. There you
So
have it.
let's talk about the book then. What will people expect from this particular book, the ADHD Success Planner?
Yeah. So the two biggest messages, and then I'm happy to go through with you in more detail, like the actual pieces of it that you put together. But the two key messages are, number one, planning and prioritizing is self-care. That if you can reframe, you're not scheduling, you're not planning or prioritizing for other people, so it's a burden. It is a way for you to have control, to show up as the person you want to be, to lower your cortisol levels. Okay, that is message number one. And message number two is, I lay out a whole system in the book. It's super simple, super personalizable, like you can make it your own. You can pick this up, put this down, take a piece of it, put that back. Like any piece that you use out of this book will be of help. If you use it all, awesome. And don't get discouraged if after a while it loses its glitter, because folks with ADHD like variety, like novelty. So I tried to introduce some of that into the system, like particularly in the daily to-do formats. But put it down, pick it up. It's all a journey. It's your journey. And just moving forward one step at a time, however you want, is success.
Number one, there's two things I got from that. Number one, I like the fact that you said that this planner is personalizable to anybody. Like you can take and pick and choose what you can implement into your life, which I think that's amazing, because a lot of times, even with a regular planner, it's not personalizable. It's not, they only give you so much space to do whatever. Whereas I think you being able to pick it up whenever they want to pick it up and work on it is great.
Yeah, I want to show you. That is, I do mine on paper. I don't even use my templates. I mean, it's so like in my head, but I do that piece of it every week. And I'm happy to walk you through the pieces of it. But yeah, like you can write it on paper, you can put it on a spreadsheet, you can really turn it into what works for you and your unique brain. But there are some basic concepts that are linked to the basic building blocks of it that are solid, they work, and you can adapt them to who you are.
So let's talk about some of the basic concepts then. What are some of them?
Yeah. Okay. So there's four, okay? Or let's call them the basic building blocks. One that I don't really talk about in the book is you gotta use a calendar. Like, you would be shocked, or maybe not, how many people don't use a calendar, or they kind of have to use one at work and then it kind of all falls apart. It's 2024, people. You got to use a calendar. I'm sorry. Yeah. And a calendar is for meetings, for events, and by the way, building in buffers if you have to travel, like all good stuff. It's not, this is my own humble opinion, it's not a to-do list. Okay, that's for something else. Okay, so the calendar, I just say you need one, practice using one before you start this system. Okay, so there's really three pieces to implement. The first, so I'll just tell you what the three are. Your weekly planning session, that's one. Number two, your weekly planning buckets. I'm just looking at it right here. Your weekly planning buckets that you do in your weekly planning session. That's element number two. And number three is your daily to-do list. Okay. So would it be helpful to walk through each of those?
Yeah, absolutely. 100%.
Okay. So the weekly planning session, even if Melissa, you said, I'm going to do that, but I'm not going to use any of the other parts. Okay, awesome. It's something. It's half an hour, 45 minutes that you commit to. Think of it as real self-care, where you sit down and think about the week ahead. And I look at what I was supposed to do last week. I never get it all done. I look at my calendar into the future, what's coming up, right? And I look in detail at the week ahead. I'll look at my calendar for next week and I'll look at, like, for example, I know I'm doing a workshop the second week of January. Well, I won't start thinking about that the week before. It will probably go on my list for next week to conceptualize it or whatever, right? The step goal. So you sit down and it's this dedicated piece of time for your self-care so that you can look at next week and take control. So step one is just this block of time where you complete the the weekly planning buckets. And what that is, and this is really, I would say, the critical piece. You look at the week ahead and you go, okay, what are my buckets? And by that, I mean, your categories. And what are sort of the key to-dos in each of those categories, right? So I'll give you an example. I usually have the bucket AB strategies admin, right? Now that will have the last week of the month invoicing questions. I have someone who helps me do the invoicing, but I have to complete certain information to give to her. That will be under my bucket for the last week in December. It's not on next week because I'm not doing my invoicing, right? I always have home admin is a bucket. So, for example, my son has to go get his wisdom teeth out, and there's a follow-up appointment with the doctor in January. I just found out my workshop is on that day. So, written onto my weekly bucket list under home admin is change date for son's doctor checkup in January, right? Because there are two, if your listeners walk away with one takeaway, this is it. The most important thing you need to do to be able to take a first step planning and prioritizing is write it down in a place where you can find it. Because if I keep that, I got to call the doctor to see if I can reschedule my son's follow-up appointment. If I keep that in my head, I am taking up precious space with that niggly little to do, and I'm not freeing up my brain to think about my next book or whatever, right? My brain is just crammed with these things to remember. Now, that goes on my weekly planning buckets. I can find it. That's important because my 86-year-old mother writes lots of things down, but on scraps of paper all over her apartment. She can't find them. In your weekly planning buckets, the key is you're looking at the arc of the week. And there's something about the arc of a week that we can hold. And I'm not scheduling. That's important. I'm just putting down on that one page, what are like the key things I need to get done in these categories this week? Okay. You with me?
Yeah, I'm with you.
Okay. The third building block is your daily to-do list. And when you do your planning session on the weekend and your weekly buckets list, that's when you do your first to-do list for the week for Monday, right? The rest of the week, ideally, it's the last thing you do before you leave work or shut down your laptop or whatever. And in the book, I give 3 versions of a daily to-do list. Because, by the way, if you've done the weekly buckets, the daily to-do list is a breeze and it takes 10, 15 minutes. I have a very detailed version. I have where it's like every half hour. I have a more like every hour. And then I have one that's just AM, PM. Because folks with ADHD like variety. You can change which to-do list you use. But the key thing is, if you know, Melissa, you look at your calendar and you have 6 hours of back-to-back Zoom meetings tomorrow, don't create a to-do list with 25 things on it, because you're just going to feel disappointed in yourself, demoralized, and frustrated. So by putting into your to-do list, on one side of it, I have like just like the time blocks. If I look at that and go, man, I've literally, if I'm going to also grab lunch, I've got an hour of time to, well, what can I fit in that hour? That helps drive what's on your to-do list. So those are the 3 components. That's it. And some weeks I don't do the to-do list. Like this week I was traveling. I just got back Tuesday night. I know I'm breaking my own system. I started a to-do list on the plane, on my Apple, on my notes, in my phone, but I did my weekly buckets. And because it's a short week, I'll kind of fudge through. But next week I'll do a full one.
Now, do you ever have the occasion where your daily to-do list, like you said at the beginning, doesn't get done? How do you keep yourself from beating yourself up over that? Because a lot of people are, I should have done this, I should have done this, I should have done this.
Yeah. So great question. Few answers. First of all, you got to be realistic, right? If I have 30 things on my list and realistically, let's say you're going to a meeting and it takes you an hour to get there and an hour to get back. And well, you maybe you can make a couple of, I could call my son's doctor, for example, but I have to be realistic about the time I have available, right? That's step 1. Number 2, I often carry things over because we also know something arrives on your to-do list today that wasn't there this morning that needs to be done today. Okay, that means I didn't get to things. I'm not going to beat myself up, right? I have a system. It's out of my head. It's in a place I can find, and I carry it over. That's really my answer. Look, in today's world, everyone's to-do list is too long. But what this system is offering you is you can't just have a long laundry list, because you got to also prioritize. And I have one client who says there's the gold star to-dos, the silver star to-dos, and the bronze star to-dos. They're all important, but the day doesn't end without the gold stars getting done. The others, I'd like to get them done, but if they're not done, that's okay. So we have to be kind to ourselves.
I like the fact that you're saying the gold star, because I know a lot of people that are like creative types as well, like to do their planners in different colors and things like that. So that's a way to get creativity out, and also say, okay, this is the non-negotiable for today. This is the gold star. So you highlight it in gold or something, so that's, I
love it.
Your eyes immediately go to that, and I think that's important.
Yeah. And I love what you said, because the more we bring bits of ourselves into what makes a more satisfying experience of even greater self-care. Some people do it on their wall. Now, that doesn't work if you travel, like you move around with work or your day. But if that, like, whatever works for you. Some people do it all with stickies, right? Like, it's whatever works for you. But these 3 pieces are like incredibly powerful when you use all 3.
So what has been your response with this book, with other when you're using them? Obviously, some with your clients or just people in general. What's been the response?
Well, I will tell you, I test drove it with an ADHD online community. They loved it so much that it became actually like a breakout room on their community site where you can go in, post your weekly plans. They sometimes get together and do their weekly plans together. It was an incredible response. And I had a client the other day who's CEO of a company, and he said to me, we need to use one of our coaching sessions soon to kind of focus on my productivity and stuff. And I said, well, he said, it's fallen down. And I said, well, when were you last feeling good about it? He said, when I was using your system.
Then that's a very simple answer, is to go back and use the system, right?
It is actually.
And I love the fact that the system is so simple, but yet it makes you sit down and think. The hardest thing I think will be people carving out that time to actually do it.
Yeah. And let me tell you a story about that. So I had a client at a very large energy company in Texas, actually. And she had a lot of moving pieces. And she really, like, when I get my weekly buckets done, I can do the daily to-do list. And we struggled a bit around the time for the planning, the self-care, the planning session. And because she had kids and the weekends were, moving pieces. And what finally worked, and this is a good reminder for any habit, is to stack your habits. So to stack a new habit on something that you're already doing can be incredibly powerful. So and she loved going to church. She went every Sunday, and she both loved it, and it was a deeply important habit or routine or ritual, whatever you want to call it, for her. So what she started doing was taking her folder and her calendar was on her phone, to church with her, and sitting in the back of church when it was over and spending 30 minutes doing her planning session then.
That's smart. That's very smart, because then you're not getting especially if you're a busy mom or a busy parent and your kids are constantly coming in, and it's like, nope, I'm here in 30 minutes. I've got time to myself. Let me get this done.
Yeah. Yeah.
It just amazes me. So why did you decide to create this planner?
Well, I think it grew out of, it's a system I use. It comes out of, I think his name is Dave Allen, Getting Things Done or something, but it's much, much simpler than his. And I had started to kind of use it with clients and realized how well it worked for my clients who were neurodiverse. And it was really when I was on the podcast circuit after my first book, and I got this encouragement, like, have you written this down? You need to write this down. And to be honest, I thought it would take, like, I wrote it down in 8 pages, and it turned out to be 70 pages. Now, there's a lot of space and a lot of like templates, but it's a very, I hope it's a very like affirming, positive, no judgment zone ebook that I like really believe in its practical value.
Now, you mentioned earlier that your son was diagnosed with ADHD. Does he use your system?
Pass on that.
Let me ask this question then. So follow up question. How old is your son that was diagnosed with ADHD?
He's 21 now and was diagnosed when he was, well, how old are you when you go from middle school to high school? Like 13, 14, around 13? Yeah.
So that kind of makes up for when you said pass, because he's 21 years old. He's out living his life. He's not worried about, he's out, I'm out having fun, because they're everything. The brain hasn't officially, it's formed, but their decision makings are still poor. Yeah. So I see that.
Well, when I talk to folks with teenagers with ADHD, I say, or when I talk to folks who have younger children diagnosed with ADHD, I say, well, just be prepared that things may look different when they're a teenager, because that's when they want to separate. That's when they want individualizing, whatever the right word is. And, there's that oppositionality to certain things, and they're trying to take control of their lives. So I always encourage parents, if they can afford it, that, medication is a very individual discussion. I always encourage try and get ADHD coaching as well, because they need to create their own systems and own habits that work for them. The sooner you can start helping them build that toolkit, the better.
Yep. I 100% agree too as well. Well, our time is almost up. Is there one last thing that either we did not hit on that you want to share, or one last little nugget that we shared and you want to go back and
Yeah. Well, just that, ADHD is not a deficiency. It just means you have a differently wired brain. It just means that. And it is both a profound and practical journey. And this ADHD Success Planner can be really helpful in the practical aspects of planning and prioritizing. And, I want to get it in everybody's hands. It's not about the money. It's less than the price of a latte, and it's worth the investment, even if you just get a couple of ideas or nuggets out of it.
I love that nuggets, because I think that's important, that there's always something we can learn from somebody else. And I love that. Now tell people where they can find you at.
Yeah. So follow me on on TikTok, Antonia Bowering. Mike, you're so good. Antonia Bowering 963. I post every day something about ADHD, a nugget. And also I'm on LinkedIn, just my name, Antonia Bowering. And my website, you also had up. And it's easy to get the link there to the ADHD Success Planner. And I'm offering the 50%. It's $7.99. And you can save 50% with the code SAVE50.
And I'm hoping that some people, you'll get some sales from this, because I think this is important. Even if you don't have ADHD, to have that success
Oh my
planner
God.
go
Yes.
through and do it.
Thank you for saying that. Yeah. Everyone's distracted. This system is absolutely works for neurotypical as well. Yeah. Thanks for saying that. Yeah.
And I think the hardest thing people are going to find to actually do this is to find the time to sit down and do it.
Yeah.
That's going to
So
be the hardest
stack
part.
that on top of something that is already baked into your weekend, if you can. Yeah. Great point.
Yep. So, Antonia, thank you for coming on and for sharing and for your passion for ADHD. People that suffer from that. Having a daughter that suffered from it really changed our world for a while, until we finally found things, management, coping, things like that for her to do, and for our parents as well to
Oh
learn.
my God. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree. And yeah, it's hard, particularly for a neurotypical parent who's just like, what is your problem? Like, why? And yeah, that's a whole other topic. And yeah, parenting a child with ADHD, you also just have to really be kind to yourself as a parent. It can be frustrating, and it's a journey for sure.
Yep, it's for sure a journey. So once again, thank you for coming on. I will share in the show notes, guys, everywhere you can find her, as well as where you can find both books, because I had the other book. And also we'll put a link in the show notes to the previous podcast episode that she came on. So you can
Great.
go back
Yeah.
and revisit that as well.
Thank
So
you.
until next time, guys. Bye.